Ladies and gentlemen, everything in between, hello, welcome to the channel. Today we've got a more historical, political video, I guess. I got a lot of requests to react to more historical and war talk videos, so I was like, okay. And we all know what's going on over in Europe right now, the reason gas is rising and all this, the world's being turned upside down, the war in Ukraine. Now, we're going to be talking about, I guess, what led up to it, reacting to all the, general information, and obviously we live it, so we know what's going on, but to get, to understand why this is happening more, I guess, is the point of this video. So we've got a video by Infographics that's titled, What Will Actually Happen If Russia Invades Ukraine? Now again, we know that Russia has in fact invaded Ukraine at this point. So yeah, but this video will at least give us more, I guess, information on what's going on and why. So let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe, like the video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let's begin.
100,000 troops stand ready on Ukraine's border with Russia. Thousands more reservists have been called up to active duty. Diplomatic talks with the US and NATO have broken down. Is Russia really about to invade Ukraine?
Yes, they did. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, okay, Ukraine should have been preparing, because why the heck do these people have 100,000? From an American standpoint, if Canada, which they would never do because we're allies, let me say Mexico. If Mexico all of a sudden starts lining up all this shit at our border, best believe we are gearing up, ready to defend ourselves for whatever they're planning. I don't think we would be the type to strike first, but just know if Mexico ever tried to strike us, we would be ready for it. And we would hit them 1,000 times harder, and that's it. So I'm wondering, Ukraine, why weren't they... why was it so easy for Russia to just go all the way to Kiev or Kyiv, you know?
And what will happen if it does? In 2014, despite publicly denying it, Russia invaded and seized Crimea, formerly recognized as Ukrainian territory by the international community. Per Russia's narrative, the Crimean Conflict was a domestically inspired revolutionary movement by ethnic Russians seeking to rejoin Russia.
Then go back to Russia. What? I did see on Twitter that a big part of this is Russia's claiming that Russians are being, purged and attacked in Ukraine. But again, there's no, actual proof of this happening. But that's, the leg that they're using to stand on to justify their invasion. But again, if you want to go back to Russia, then go back to Russia. Silly.
However, it very quickly became clear that this was a lie, as Russian special forces, who earned the moniker Little Green Men for their featureless uniforms, were confirmed to be working with Crimean rebels. Then, deep dives into Russian social media produced even more damning evidence of regular Russian soldiers operating inside of Ukrainian territory itself. Russia never formally admitted to utilizing both unconventional and conventional military forces in Crimea to fight off Ukrainian forces, and in the end, Crimea declared itself independent and was quickly absorbed by Russia. Since then, fighting against rebel forces has continued across disputed Ukrainian territory.
Yeah, I was thinking Crimea is a territory within Ukraine, but it sounds like they're like a piece between the two, and they've just been now joined into Russia.
And Russia has continued to support those rebel forces, albeit in a slightly less obvious way. Now the fear of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine seems more real than ever, as 100,000 Russian soldiers mass on the border with the breakaway former Soviet republic. But why would Russia risk angering the world with an invasion of a bordering nation? Could it really do it, and what would the world's response be if it did?
And what is their hate for NATO? A big part of this I also saw was that they're trying to fight the eastward expansion of NATO, and was Ukraine saying that they wanted to join NATO, and what would be the problem with that if they did?
Since the end of the Cold War, Russia has largely been in retreat from its former Soviet glory. It saw massive losses of territory and subsequent economic outflow from the independence of numerous former Soviet republics. As the nation struggled through tumultuous post-Soviet Union years, many of these newly independent nations took the opportunity to ensure their own survival and independence by drawing closer ties with the West.
Yeah.
Russia made it very clear that it did not want NATO to expand further east than Germany. And yet, one by one, new Eastern European states joined NATO's ranks.
But Russia, you can't tell other people what they can and cannot do. If they want to join NATO to make a bigger alliance, why wouldn't they? That makes the most sense. You know, if one day or whatever happens to a certain NATO country, you have the entire NATO alliance backing you. That sounds like a good thing. But Russia wants to, stand on their own 2 feet and be the big bad guys that they can defend themselves. Okay, they do that. But everybody else, if they want to be an alliance, why not? It ultimately helps everyone.
Pushing NATO forces closer and closer to Russian territory. Eventually, NATO would stand on Russia's northern border, with NATO forces within 500 miles of Moscow itself. For a nation...
Wait, what did that say? Imagine if Russia had forced 500...
With NATO forces within 500 miles of Moscow itself. For a nation with as difficult a history as Russia, this was the sum of all fears.
Now, when you put it like that, that little bubble said, imagine if Russia had forced 500 miles from Washington, D.C., which is the American capital. Now, if America was not a United States of America, and all these states were their own country, and it's like the entire, or it's actually on the East Coast, the entire country now joining an alliance right on the border of your capital, then you're like, back your ass up. Yeah. But again, I still don't support an invasion, but I do see, like, you don't want this foreign alliance coming to your border, you know? When you put it like that and say, hey, how would you like it if this random allegiance was 500 miles from your capital? How would you feel about that? I would feel uneasy. I would be like, what are you here for? What do you want? You want to go to war? Like, what's going on here? So I understand it, but it does not justify an invasion, in my opinion. Like, America, we would sit down and talk, like, hey, why are you coming closer and closer to us? Like, back up. Do you want to work together? But we don't want to, like, be in your alliance. But we would try to mitigate and talk about it, because that's kind of what politics is, talking. Not freaking invading.
And a strategic disaster. Rarely ever the invader, Russia itself has been repeatedly invaded throughout its history. And each time, the human and economic toll was profound. Many of these invasions threatened the very independence of the nation itself, such as Germany's near defeat of the Red Army in World War II, and Napoleon's invasion during the Napoleonic Wars. These invasions are so threatening because Russia sits at the eastern edge of the European plain, a large swath of relatively flat land that's very difficult to defend. With modern, fast-moving military formations, this strategic deficiency only increased. And after World War II, the Soviet Union became obsessed with pushing any potential future aggressor as far west as possible. This led the Soviet Union to extend its sphere of influence as far west as Germany, creating the infamous Soviet bloc as a buffer zone to any future invasion.
So because, like, you're afraid of getting invaded, you're going to invade other people and make your territories bigger and bigger and bigger. So because you don't want to be a victim, you then become the aggressor. Maybe if you're like a supervillain, that makes sense. But to me, I'm like, okay, let's talk it out, you know? Or make an alliance with people. Don't, like, invade them.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, Russia's influence receded practically back to its own borders, and all the strategic gains of the last 50 years evaporated overnight. Today, more Eastern European nations have chosen to draw closer to the U.S. and its European allies than to Russia, mostly due to Russia's authoritarian system of government and fears of becoming puppet states once more.
Exactly. I mean, when you think of an alliance, you want to be independent, but just know that you have someone to call on. You want to have your own identity, obviously, but still be, like, within this trusting network of countries. Now, if you want to align, like, wasn't there agreements with Ukraine, like they would give them their political, their, what do you call it? Nuclear stuff. They would give them their war weapons, all that, just if they promised not to invade them. And this was years ago, and look what happened. They gave them all their stuff, but now they're being invaded. So it's like you can't be in an alliance with someone like Russia, because there's no, like, they will do whatever they want to get whatever they want at the end of the day. And you don't want to be collateral damage to that. Which is probably why more and more people were joining NATO. You gotta prove that you're, I guess, someone that people can trust. And Russia has not done that.
As the new millennium dawned, Ukraine began to seek a pathway for membership in NATO. And Russia warned that this would be tantamount to a declaration of war between its...
No, it wouldn't, you dummy! That has nothing to do with you. Sure, they're getting closer and closer to your border, but Ukraine joining NATO has nothing to do with you. It's to make sure that they have their own safety. Because if they were in NATO, do you think Russia would have invaded them today? No, they wouldn't have. Because guess what? You would have America and all the other NATO countries coming to fight you. But because they haven't been able to join NATO, they're kind of on their own, essentially. Which is still sad. I mean, America is putting sanctions on Russia and doing all this stuff. And they're making it hard for Russian citizens. But it's not to the extent that we're going to go straight to war with Russia. Because, again, they're not a NATO country. It's a slippery slope. Because also you don't want to start World War III, which I guess we could react to. There's other videos talking about World War III. Let me know if y'all want to react to that.
Itself in NATO. Not willing to antagonize Russia, NATO postponed the Ukrainian question indefinitely.
But why are we bending over backwards to appease Russia? Like, I don't... Just because we know that they're ludicrous? I don't get it.
Despite building cooperative ties with the nation. In 2014, Ukraine's worst fears were realized. And now its continued independence is in question by the 100,000-strong Russian forces massing on the border.
Since 2014? I thought this was all recent, but they've been like moving along with this for years.
Russia invaded, though, how would Ukraine fare without Western aid? Ukraine has a population roughly a third of the size of Russia, and
but they're holding their own right now.
At the number 22 spot, according to GlobalFirepower.com, which ranks world military powers according to the strength of their militaries, their economies, and demographics.
I'm assuming America is number one. And also, I would just like to point out that my heart kind of breaks for the Ukrainian citizens. Because, like, over here you have a choice in America to join the military. I would not, because I'm not putting my life at risk for people I don't know. No offense. But if you wanted to join the military in America, you have that choice. Over in Ukraine, the population is so small that it's like, they don't even have enough people in their military to fight against Russia, so they started calling on the aid of their own citizens. People who have probably never held a gun before, don't know anything about the machinery, are now expected to defend their country. And that's commendable, but scary as hell. Oh yeah, I have a lot of like praise and admiration to Ukrainians right now.
Russia, despite slowly slipping out of it, still retains the number 2 spot as the world's second strongest military power, and its overmatch with Ukraine is significant.
Dang.
Russia's military numbers at 850,000 active personnel versus Ukraine's 200,000 strong military, a mismatch of 650,000 in Russia's favor.
But they're still holding their own right now.
Due to the ever-growing threat of all-out war with Russia, both Ukraine and Russia have the same number of available reservists, 250,000, as Ukraine has dramatically increased readiness and training of reservist units. Since 2014, it's created dozens of additional reserve units, which can be quickly activated to combat Russian troops. In the air, Russia absolutely dwarfs Ukraine, with the second best air force in the world, numbering 4,173 strong.
Okay, so we get it. Like, when you look at the stats, Ukraine is not measuring up. But right now, as they're being invaded, aren't the neighboring countries, like, sending in planes, sending in utilities and stuff? Whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. They're being helped, basically, is my point. I wonder if America has sent anything over. Not our troops, but, like, we spend, like, $700 billion on our military. I'm sure we have stuff that we can give, you know?
Ukraine, on the other hand, only has 318 aircraft available, with only 69 of those being fighter aircraft, versus a fleet of 772 Russian fighters.
But it's like, if in 2014 you had 100,000 Russian... Was it just they didn't have the money? Or what? Like, they could have gotten a loan from someone. You have 100,000 Russian troops at your border. You should be preparing, because they're not just there to play chess. Rock, paper, scissors. They're there for a reason. And I'm wondering, like, why didn't they start, okay, something's going to happen. And now that it's happened, it's kind of like scrambling.
Russia also enjoys a massive advantage in attack aircraft, with 739
like, look at those
dedicated attack
numbers
platforms versus Ukraine's 29.
Strategy can only take you so far. Like, this, it's wild. But again, Ukraine is holding their own right now as they're being invaded, so I guess numbers don't really matter all that much.
The world's second largest air mobility fleet, Russia can call upon 445 aircraft to rapidly move troops into combat areas or launch airborne invasions deep into Ukrainian territory.
But why, also, it makes me think, like, why are the Russian people, like, military doing this? Do they not realize this is wrong? You're invading a country who has done really nothing to you. Like, the whole idea of they're attacking our citizens. Where's the proof? They don't think, where's the proof? Where's the content to show that this is actually happening? Like, you're just... And do you not realize that the entire world is not supporting you? Like, that should be a clue in. What, you just think everybody has a vendetta against you? Like, that makes no, that's not how it works.
By comparison, Ukraine's tiny air mobility fleet of 32 would struggle to move significant personnel or supplies in theater. Russia's attack helicopter fleet also vastly outnumbers Ukraine's own, with 544 versus 34. On land, Russia claims tank corps of 12,000 strong.
Again, though, as he's saying this, you would suspect that this would be a sweep, and Russia would just take over Ukraine. But that's not what is happening right now, remember.
But it's widely accepted that only a few thousand of those vehicles, likely around 6,000, are capable of immediate combat operations. The rest are Cold War-era leftovers, which are in a mothball storage and would require weeks to reactivate and deploy. Ukraine, on the other hand, has a tank force of 2,596, giving Russia a probable 2-to-1 advantage over Ukraine. Russia also maintains a sizable advantage in number of armored vehicles used to support combat operations, with 30,122 versus Ukraine's 12,303. So, what story do these numbers tell about a possible Russian invasion? Firstly, while the numbers advantage is decidedly on the Russian side, Ukraine wouldn't actually be facing the full force of the Russian military, even in a worst-case scenario. That's because a significant number of those troops are required for security operations elsewhere. Russia must still maintain a strong defensive posture along its northern border with NATO.
I mean, they're so worried about NATO. NATO is not worried about you, Russia. Josh, I'm filming. Like, they're saying they have to keep reserves in case another person attacks, but do they not realize they're the only ones attacking anybody? Like, it's ridiculous.
And along its far eastern flank on the Pacific, in order to deter a possible American incursion. Realistically, only about 50...
Where did you go? Oh? Where did you go dressed up?
50% of its western and southern military districts would be freed up for combat operations in Ukraine, with some reinforcements from the rest of Russia's 3 other military districts. A probable invasion of Ukraine would involve between 150,000 to 200,000 troops, bringing the number parity much more in line, as Ukraine would be free to use most of its forces to combat the Russian invasion. With Belarus still being a strong Russian ally, though...
Belarus. I thought their name was Belarus. I always say that. Belarus. And a lot of these countries I've never even heard of, but they're so, like, prominent when it comes to this war.
A significant number of Ukrainian forces must be left in reserve in case of an unexpected northern incursion, so even Ukraine can't commit its entire force to the fight.
And you gotta think, like, let's say, worst case scenario, heartbreaking, Russia does take over Ukraine. They're not just gonna stop at Ukraine. Like, their ultimate goal is not just to stop Ukraine. I'm sure they want to invade everyone and expand like they were before, making this huge empire. Like, they're not just going to stop at Ukraine. And what do we do then? We just keep sitting because we're afraid World War III will happen? Like, I feel like, in my opinion, okay. I feel like Putin has been allowed to do whatever he wants for a long time just because everyone's scared of the what if. But at the same time, like, I don't want to send American troops to a fight that technically is not our own yet. It's the same thing as World War II. We didn't get into the war until Pearl Harbor because we weren't directly attacked. And I don't want to risk American lives for another country, but at the same time, we can't just allow Putin to do whatever he wants. So it's like we're just going to sanction him to death? I don't think that's going to work. Homie is going to invade further and further west of Europe. And then it's like, okay, what do we do? Well, if he invades a NATO country, then we have to, because we're a part of NATO. But I don't know. Y'all give me your opinions on what's going on, and let me know if you want a part 2 to this video. Subscribe, like, do all that. Bye.